Claw marks gouged the ancient Illyrian desk as Pollux dragged his nails across its surface, the elderly historian's voice low and rasping. When the Illyrians lost the war against Earth, a lone human ship cutting our fleet to ribbons at first contact, Earth became the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. The dim classroom lights flickered across the faces of the young students hanging on his every word. They had to learn the true cost of Illyrian hubris and the deadly capabilities of the human race. We were desperate for resources, scouring uncharted space, when Commander Zahn found the little blue marble, primitive radio signals, combustion engines, feeble orbital presence. Pollux stalked between desks, meeting wide eyes. A backwater species ripe for conquest. He slammed a fist on a desk, making a student jump. The Illyrian war machine was unleashed, 50 warships led by Admiral Krell, our best and brightest, to crush humanity and strip their world bare. But then a single human warship appeared, demanding we state our intentions. The arrogance, Krell ordered it destroyed. Pollux shook his head. That ship, the Valiant, it moved like lightning. Plasma torpedoes punched through our shields like paper. 3 ships crippled before Krell even processed the ambush. The students' mouths hung open. This was the untold story of first contact, the Illyrians humbled and broken by one ship captained by the legendary Vincent Grant. The disastrous expedition that sparked decades of brutal war, all because the Illyrians fatally underestimated the ingenuity and ferocity of humankind. We fired everything: mass drivers, antimatter charges, singularity missiles. The Valiant wove through it all, a barracuda ripping into fat, complacent sharks. Krell sounded the retreat, dragging our bleeding fleet to lick its wounds and plan revenge. Pollux returned to his desk, surveying the captivated students. That was the start, the incident that earned Earth its reputation as the deadliest planet ever discovered, and the Illyrian Earth War had only just begun. If we failed to conquer them, it would be the end of our empire and our species. We had no idea what we were truly up against. Pollux took a breath, letting the weight of the Illyrian fleet's second humiliation sink in. His eyes glinted with a mix of old anger and grudging respect. Krell was beside himself. Apoplectic with rage, he paced the bridge of his battered dreadnought at the edges of the human's solar system. The historian's voice turned scathing. He berated his intelligence officers, demanding to know every scrap of data about Earth's defenses, as if the fault lay in a lack of information and not his own hubris. The classroom was deathly silent, hanging on every word. Pollux continued, but as they listened in on the humans' transmissions, a glimmer of opportunity emerged. Earth was no unified power. It was fractured, divided into squabbling nation-states. Some advanced, others less so. He sneered. Krell saw a weakness to exploit. The great admiral ordered an assault on the most primitive countries. Easier targets. Pollux shook his head. If only he knew what awaited. As the Illyrian ship swooped in, a storm of fire rose to meet them. The UNSDF, the Humans' Global Defense Force, warships, satellites, ground artillery, a multi-layered grid of guns and armor. The historian's voice swelled with reluctant admiration. At its head was General Stone, a veteran commander as canny as Krell was arrogant, and at his side flew the Valiant, with a squadron of new human destroyers. The Endeavour, the Ares, ships whose names would be branded into Illyrian nightmares. Pollux leaned forward, eyes gleaming. And Captain Grant, the Valiant's wily master, he had a plan to bleed Krell dry. False trails and sensor ghosts, drawing the Illyrian fleet away from Earth, out to the moons of Jupiter and into the killing field. The students were riveted, barely breathing. Krell took the bait, chasing the humans to Europa, and out from the ice a swarm of drones, stealthed, atomic-armed, and utterly merciless. 100 Illyrian ships died in nuclear fire. Pollux let out a harsh bark of laughter. Oh, if you could have seen Krell's face, his flagship in ruins, his fleet shattered, running again with his tail between his legs, fleeing the very beings he'd dismissed as primitives. The old Illyrian fell silent, his eyes distant. The students waited with bated breath, knowing there had to be more to the tale. More to the war that nearly brought their species to extinction. The war that proved humanity was never to be underestimated. The old historian's gaze turned inward as he continued his tale. Out in the void, Krell seethed, his once proud fleet reduced to a shadow of its former might. A blinking light on his command console heralded a message from the Illyrian High Council. He knew what it would say before he even opened it. A demand for answers, for accountability, for blood. Pollux's voice grew cold. Krell was desperate now. Desperate to save his own skin, to prove he could still conquer the humans. He turned to his scientists, ordering them to create a weapon that could crush Earth's resistance once and for all. The students leaned forward, caught in the story's grip. And so, in the hidden laboratories of the Illyrian fleet, a monstrous device took shape. An EMP generator of unprecedented scale, designed to fry every circuit on Earth, to send the humans back to the Stone Age. On the classroom's view screen, an image formed. A gleaming, pulsing sphere, bristling with antennae and crackling with energy. But even as Krell plotted, the humans celebrated. Captain Grant and his crew were hailed as saviors, their names etched into history. But Grant knew better than to let his guard down. He could feel the Illyrians out there, watching, waiting. Pollux's voice took on a note of grim admiration. He worked day and night with General Stone, shoring up Earth's defenses. More ships, more guns, more soldiers. They knew the next blow would fall soon, and they were right. The view screen shifted, showing a sleek Illyrian ship shimmering into visibility near Earth. Krell's EMP weapon struck without warning. In an instant, satellites went dark, power grids crashed, cities plunged into darkness, and in that moment of chaos, the Illyrians attacked. The old Illyrian's voice grew harsh. Dropships rained from the sky, disgorging troops into the heart of Earth's great cities. New York, London, Tokyo, all under siege in a matter of hours. The humans fought back, but they were outmatched. Illyrian plasma rifles cut through their armor like a knife through flesh, while the invaders' force field shrugged off bullets and shells alike. Pollux paused, letting the grim image sink in. But even in their darkest hour, the humans wouldn't surrender. Captain Grant took the Valiant on a desperate mission, fighting through the Illyrian fleet to the EMP generator's location, and with a salvo of quantum torpedoes, he sent it to oblivion. The classroom lights seemed to flicker in sympathy. With the EMP gone, Earth's grid surged back to life, and the humans launched their counterattack. In every occupied city, UNSDF troopers and civilian resistance fighters rose up, engaging the Illyrians in brutal street-to-street combat. Pollux's voice swelled with reluctant respect. They fought with a ferocity we'd never seen before. Every building became a fortress, every alley a killing field. They used the urban landscape against us, luring our troops into ambushes, cutting off our supply lines. For every human that fell, they made sure to take a dozen Illyrians with them. The old historian paused, his eyes distant. But even as the battle raged on Earth, a new threat emerged. The Zorgons, a rival species on our borders, had sensed our weakness. They struck at our colonies, our outposts, forcing Krell to face a terrible choice. Pollux's voice grew somber. In the end, pragmatism won out over pride. Krell knew he couldn't fight a war on two fronts, not with his fleet already battered and bleeding, and so, with the taste of ashes in his mouth, he gave the order to withdraw, to abandon our grand conquest and leave Earth unconquered. The Illyrian's gaze swept over his audience, seeing the shock and disbelief in their eyes. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but in a way the Zorgons saved us from ourselves. If we had stayed, if we had committed all our might to crushing Earth, who knows what would have happened? How many more of our ships would have burned? How many more of our soldiers would have died on alien soil? Pollux fell silent, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. The students sat in stunned quiet, processing the incredible tale they had just heard. The story of humanity's resilience, of the Illyrian Empire's hubris, and of the thin line between victory and defeat. The old historian stared out the window, to the stars glimmering beyond. Stars that had once seemed theirs for the taking, until a small blue world had taught them the folly of their arrogance. the folly that had nearly brought their civilization to ruin, the folly they would never forget. The old historian's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and trepidation as he delved deeper into the aftermath of the Illyrian retreat. In their haste to flee Earth, the Illyrians left behind caches of their advanced technology, weapons, shields, propulsion systems, a treasure trove for our scientists to study and reverse engineer. He paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. General Stone wasted no time. UNSDF teams scoured the globe, securing every scrap of alien tech they could find, and leading the charge to unravel its secrets was none other than Admiral Vincent Grant, the hero of the Illyrian War. Pollux's voice swelled with pride. Grant was a man on a mission. He knew we couldn't rest on our laurels, not with the threat of another invasion always looming. And so he threw himself into Project Aegis, a global network of early warning systems and defensive platforms, all powered by reverse-engineered Illyrian tech. But the historian's tone grew somber. But as we soon learned, tampering with alien technology is a double-edged sword. In a top-secret UNSDF facility deep in the Siberian tundra, something went terribly wrong. The view screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a massive explosion, followed by scenes of chaos and panic. The accident released a virulent alien pathogen into the atmosphere. We called it the Illyrian Plague, a fitting name for the horror it unleashed. He shook his head. It was like something out of a nightmare, and at the center of it all was Admiral Grant, working around the clock with the world's brightest minds to find a cure. The historian's eyes narrowed. But the key to stopping the plague lay within the very technology that had created it. Neovium, a rare Illyrian element with incredible medicinal properties. The only problem? The only known source was an Illyrian colony world, light years away and heavily defended. Pollux leaned forward, his voice low. Grant knew what he had to do. He assembled a team of his best soldiers, led by his right-hand man, Captain Marcus Reeves. Their mission, infiltrate the colony, secure a sample of neovium, and get out alive. The old Illyrian paused, letting the weight of the task sink in. But even as they prepared for the most important mission of their lives, a message came through. An Illyrian defector, calling himself Orion, offering to help. For a price. Pollux's eyes glinted. Grant was skeptical, of course, but he also knew that Orion's intel could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death for billions, and so, against his better judgment perhaps, he agreed to the deal. The historian fell silent, his gaze distant. The students sat transfixed, hardly daring to breathe. They knew they were hearing a story that would be told for generations, a tale of desperation, of sacrifice, and of the indomitable human spirit in the face of annihilation. The fate of Earth, of humanity itself, now rested on the shoulders of Admiral Grant and his team, and as they set course for the distant Illyrian colony, each one knew they might not return. But they also knew they had no choice. For the sake of their species, they would risk everything. Aboard the UNSS Phantom, Admiral Grant studied the holographic schematic of the neovium processing facility on Zephyrus Prime. Orion stood beside him, the Illyrian defector's face grim. "The main refinery is here," he indicated a pulsing red section. "Neovium ore from across the sector is processed and refined. It will be heavily guarded." Grant nodded. "And our best infiltration point?" Orion zoomed the projection in on a service tunnel. "This old maintenance access, it bypasses the primary security grid, but there's still active patrols and scanner drones. We'll need to be quick and quiet." On the view screen, Zephyrus Prime loomed, an angry red planet webbed with metal. Towering atmospheric processors belched smog, while arc lamp-lit dome cities glittered on the dark side. Suddenly, proximity alarms blared. "They've made us," Captain Reeves barked from the pilot's seat. "Illyrian fast attack ships on intercept course. Looks like a standard patrol, but—" "They'll be alerting the colony," Grant finished, mind racing. The original plan had been to slip into a low orbit and drop the infiltration team via stealth shuttle, but now— The teleporter. Reeves' voice was tight. "We can beam you straight into the tunnels." "That thing's barely been tested on cargo, never mind people," protested Sergeant Kai, the team's demolitions expert. "The fuck knows what it'll do to our atoms." In the Phantom's cramped teleportation chamber, Grant eyed the gleaming pad and swirling beam emitters. His skin crawled at the thought of being torn apart molecule by molecule and spat out light years away. But Earth was dying. This was the only way. "I'll go first," he declared. "Make sure it's safe." "Not open for debate, Captain. The mission comes first." He stepped up onto the pad, every nerve screaming, "Energize!" Reality shattered into a billion motes of light. Searing cold, then blazing heat. Blinding brilliance, then utter dark. Grant felt himself stretch into infinity, hurled across unimaginable gulfs. And then, with a gut-wrenching lurch, he slammed back into solidity. Gasping, he found himself crouched in a dimly lit tunnel, the air acrid with chemical stench. It had worked. One by one, the rest of the team materialized around him, wavering into existence from coruscating pillars of light. They were in. With Orion on point, they moved swiftly through the claustrophobic maintenance ducts, the Illyrian guiding them around security choke points and guard posts. Grant's grip was iron on his plasma rifle, senses hyper-alert. "Can you hack it?" Grant demanded. "No need." Orion's face was unreadable. "It will open for me." He pressed his hand to the gene scanner. "Orion, sign of House Draconis," the computer intoned. "Access granted." The hatch slid open. Grant stared at the defector. "You're Illyrian royalty." The team burst into the refinery chamber, stun grenades and laser fire erupting. Illyrian guards fell, and the humans raced to the glowing tanks of liquid neovium at the room's heart. Sergeant Kai hastily affixed plasma charges to the tank's bases as Grant and Reeves held off the remaining defenders. "Charges set!" Kai yelled. 30 seconds! "Phantom, lock on and prepare for immediate evac," Grant barked into his comm. "We have the package." Just then, a searing plasma bolt took Reeves in the side. He crashed to the decking, his armor smoking. "Reeves!" Grant cried, rushing to his friend. More Illyrians were pouring in, the air thick with energy blasts. "Timer's running," Kai warned. "We need to move." "Help me with him," Grant ordered, trying to lift Reeves. But the captain shook his head. "No time," he gasped. "I'll cover you. Get that neovium back to Earth." His eyes held Grant's. "You have to go now." Grant's heart wrenched, but he knew Reeves was right. "Fall back to the drop point," he roared to the team. To Reeves he said, "I'll come back for you, my friend. I swear it." Then he was running, Reeves's covering fire echoing behind him. The evac point loomed ahead. Phantom 5 to beam up. As the teleporter took him, Grant's last sight was the refinery exploding into a maelstrom of fire and debris. Then the Phantom's cramped confines swam into focus around him. "Punch it!" Grant yelled to the pilot. On screen, Zephyrus Prime dwindled to a mote as the ship leapt for Earth. They had the neovium, but the cost... Grant squeezed his eyes shut against the grief. Reeves, his brother-in-arms, left behind, but there was no time to mourn. The plague still ravaged Earth. And now, Grant knew, the Illyrians would be hell-bent on revenge. The war was far from over. Pollux fell silent, his audience enwrapped. The old historian seemed to sag, the weight of memory heavy on his shoulders. The Phantom sped back to Earth, its precious cargo secure, but for Admiral Grant there was no elation in the victory, only grim resolution and a promise to be kept. He met his student's eyes. Unbeknownst to Grant, even as he raced to deliver the neovium, Illyrian forces were already marshalling. Outraged by the raid on Zephyrus Prime and the loss of the sacred element, the Illyrian Emperor himself had ordered his most ruthless commander to crush the humans once and for all, and to make an example of the one who had led the assault. The view screen flickered with a new image, a blasted, ruined cityscape, fires guttering in the shells of buildings. "New York," Pollux intoned, "the shining jewel of the UNSDF, the nerve center of Earth's defenses, and the place where Admiral Grant had been born. He turned back to the students, eyes hard. Krell would raise Grant's home to ashes. He would visit upon the humans the same pain and loss the Illyrians had suffered, and he would drag their greatest hero before the Emperor in chains, to be executed for all the galaxy to see. Pollux' fist clenched, but the Illyrians, in their arrogance and their rage, had forgotten the most important lesson of the war, the one truth that Admiral Grant embodied down to his very marrow. He leaned forward, his growl building to a righteous snarl. Never ever underestimate humanity's resolve. For when we are pushed to the brink, when all seems lost, that is when we are at our most dangerous. That is when heroes are forged. The historian straightened, the fire of pride in his eyes. And as Krell's armada darkened the skies of Earth, as the Illyrian war machine came to grind humanity beneath its cruel treads, the stage was set for Admiral Grant's finest hour, the hour that would echo through the ages and leave the galaxy forever changed. But that, my students, is a story for another day. In the depths of the UNSDF's most advanced research facility, Dr. Eliza Hoffman worked around the clock, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and endless cups of coffee. The neovium sample, procured at such a high cost, glowed softly in its containment unit, taunting her with its secrets. Pollux paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. But Hoffman was no ordinary scientist. Her mind was as sharp as a blade, her determination unbreakable. She had sworn an oath to find a cure, no matter the price. Days turned into weeks as Hoffman and her team tested countless formulas, each one a failure. The infected writhed in agony, their screams echoing through the quarantined wards. But then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, Hoffman turned to the ancient wisdom of Earth's own biology. "The nightshade lotus," Pollux intoned, his eyes gleaming. "A flower of legend said to hold the power of life and death." Hoffman had dismissed it as mere myth, but now, with time running out, she grasped at any hope. In a hidden greenhouse deep within the facility, Hoffman cultivated the rare blooms, their petals black as the void. With trembling hands, she extracted their essence, combining it with the neovium in a final, desperate gamble. The historian's voice rose with excitement, and against all odds it worked. The serum coursed through the infected, neutralizing the virus, reversing its terrible effects. The first patient opened her eyes, lucid for the first time in months, then another, and another. Across the globe, the serum was mass-produced and distributed, the tide turning in the war against the plague. Cities were reclaimed, block by block, as the walking nightmares were subdued and cured. But the scars ran deep, and the cost had been unimaginable. Pollux's voice grew somber. Millions had perished, and the world lay in ruins. The great cities, once bastions of human ingenuity, were now but shells of their former glory. It would take generations to rebuild, to heal the wounds both physical and psychological. But even as Earth began its slow recovery, Admiral Grant languished in an Illyrian prison light years away. The scars of torture marked his body, but his spirit remained unbroken. He would endure 1,000 hells before betraying his people. In the darkness of his cell, Grant found an unlikely ally, Pollux continued, Dr. Zoran Kerrick, an Illyrian scientist imprisoned for daring to dream of peace. Together, they whispered of escape, of a future where their species could coexist. On Earth, Captain Reeves, his body healed, but his heart heavy with the loss of his friend, took command of the Phantom once more. He handpicked a team of the UNSDF's finest, each one driven by a personal debt to Admiral Grant. And Orion, the enigmatic defector, pledged his knowledge to their cause, Pollux added. He knew the Illyrian prison's every secret, every weakness. With his help, they would breach its walls and bring their hero home. In a daring raid, the Phantom's crew fought their way into the heart of the prison, plasma bolts scorching the alien metal. Deep in the labyrinth of cells, Grant and Kerrick made their move, overpowering their guards and racing for freedom. The historian paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The return to Earth was a triumph tempered by sorrow. Grant and Kerrick were hailed as heroes, living symbols of the indomitable human spirit, and Kerrick, in a gesture of unprecedented trust, offered to share the secrets of Neovium with the UNSDF, a chance for Earth to rise from the ashes stronger than ever. But Pollex's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. Yet even as they celebrated, a new shadow loomed on the horizon. The Illyrian Empire, fresh from victory against the Zorgons, turned its vengeful gaze back to Earth. The theft of the Neovium, the humiliation of their defeat, these were sins they would see repaid in blood. The historian leaned forward, his audience hanging on his every word. The greatest test was yet to come. Admiral Grant, Captain Reeves, Orion, Dr. Kerrick, the fate of Earth would rest on their shoulders once more. And this time, the Illyrians would not underestimate the strength of human resolve. The final battle was about to begin, and its outcome would echo through the ages. Pollux fell silent, his tale unfinished. The tension in the room so thick it could be cut with a knife. The students sat in rapt attention, their hearts pounding, their imaginations racing. They knew they had just heard a story that would be told for generations, a legend in the making. In the command center of the UNSDF headquarters, Admiral Grant stood before a room of grim-faced generals and military leaders. The tension in the air crackled like a live wire as he outlined his audacious plan to strike at the heart of the Illyrian Empire. The room erupted into a cacophony of dissent. "Admiral, with all due respect," one general interjected, "our forces are still reeling from the last invasion, and the Illyrian plague has left us weakened. We can't possibly mount an offensive now." Grant's eyes flashed. "And what's the alternative? To let the Illyrians roll over us, to watch as they burn our cities and slaughter our people?" He slammed his fist on the table. "No, we fight, and we fight now." A hush fell over the room. Then Dr. Kerrick stepped forward, a glint in his eye. "There may be a way," he said softly. "A weapon I've been working on. It harnesses the power of Neovium to create a localized singularity. In theory, it could destroy an entire planet." But Grant cut him off. "Ethics won't matter if we're all dead," he snapped. "Dr. Kerrick, tell us more about this weapon." Kerrick nodded. "I call it the Neovium Singularity Bomb, or NSB. It's still experimental, untested, but I believe it's our best chance to end this war quickly, with minimal loss of life on both sides." The debate raged on, voices rising and falling like the tide. Some argued for the sanctity of life, the moral high ground. Others pointed to the mounting death toll, the inevitability of annihilation if they didn't act. In the end, it was Grant's voice that cut through the din. "We have to do this," he said quietly. "For Earth, for humanity. We have to be willing to make the hard choices, to bear the burden of what must be done." Silence fell, heavy and final. Then one by one the generals nodded their assent. The die was cast. As the UNSDF prepared for the mission to Illyria Prime, whispers of dissent stirred within the Illyrian ranks. In the shadows of the War Council, Admiral Jean, Krell's longtime rival, spoke out against the continued aggression. "The humans have proven themselves worthy adversaries," Jean argued. "Further conflict will only lead to more destruction, more Illyrian lives lost. We should seek a diplomatic solution, a path to peace." But Krell would not be swayed. His eyes blazed with the fires of vengeance, his heart consumed by the humiliation of past defeats. "Peace," he spat. "There can be no peace until Earth is nothing but ashes, until the human scourge is wiped from the galaxy." With a deft political maneuver, Krell outflanked Jean, seizing control of the War Council. His orders were swift and merciless, total mobilization, a full-scale invasion of Earth. The Illyrian Armada, 1,000 ships strong, set course for the human homeworld, ready to drown it in fire and blood. As they neared their target, the Phantom's sensors screamed a warning. A massive Illyrian warship, the IES Vengeance, loomed before them, its weapons primed and ready. "Krell," Grant growled, recognizing the flagship. "He's here." The Vengeance opened fire, its plasma cannons tearing through the void. The Phantom shuddered under the onslaught, its shield straining to the breaking point. Grant's mind raced, calculating odds, running scenarios. Then, with a grim set to his jaw, he gave the order. "Ramming speed," he said softly. "Aim for the Vengeance's bridge." As the Phantom surged forward on a collision course, Grant turned to his strike team, to Captain Reeves and the hardened Marines at his side. "Prep for boarding action," he commanded. "We're going to take this fight to Krell, up close and personal." The two ships closed the distance. The Phantom, a silver arrow aimed at the Vengeance's heart. At the last moment, the human ship veered, its hull scraping along the Illyrian battleship's flank in a shower of sparks and shearing metal. With a bone-jarring thud, the Phantom's airlock clamped onto the Vengeance's hull. The Marines, pulse rifles at the ready, charged through the breach, Admiral Grant at their head. Alarms blared through the Illyrian ship as the boarding party advanced, gunfire erupting in the corridors. Illyrian soldiers fell before the human onslaught, their blood painting the bulkheads. On the bridge, Admiral Krell watched the carnage unfold on the view screens, his face a mask of rage. "Repel the invaders," he snarled to his crew. "I want Grant's head on a pike." But even as he spoke, the bridge doors exploded inward. Through the smoke and flames, Admiral Grant emerged, his rifle leveled at Krell's chest. "That's over, Krell," Grant said coldly. "Surrender, and your crew will be spared." Krell's lips twisted in a sneer. "Surrender? To a primitive ape like you?" His hand inched towards his sidearm. "Never." In a blur of motion, Krell drew his weapon, a plasma bolt searing the air. But Grant was faster, his rifle bucking in his grip. The shot took Krell high in the shoulder, spinning him back against the console. As the Illyrian admiral slumped to the deck, his blood pooling beneath him, Grant stepped forward, kicking the plasma pistol from his hand. "Admiral Jan was right," he said softly. "There's been enough death, enough destruction. It's time to end this, before it's too late for both our peoples." Krell's eyes blazed with hate, but he said nothing. The fight seemed to drain out of him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Grant turned to Reeves. "Signal the Phantom, tell them we have Krell, and then open a channel to the Illyrian fleet." Reeves nodded, his fingers flying over the comm controls. "Channel open, sir." Grant took a deep breath. "Attention, Illyrian fleet. This is Admiral Vincent Grant of the UNSDF. We have captured Admiral Krell and taken control of the IES Vengeance. Stand down immediately and prepare for negotiations. Any further aggression will be met with the full force of Earth's defenses." There was a moment of tense silence. Then one by one the Illyrian ships began to power down their weapons, their engines going dark. On the Vengeance's bridge, Grant allowed himself a small, tight smile. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought the mighty Illyrian war machine to its knees. But even as he savored the taste of victory, he knew that the true challenge still lay ahead. The challenge of forging a lasting peace between two worlds, two species, that had known nothing but war and hatred. It would be a long and difficult road, but for the first time in years Grant allowed himself to hope, to believe that a better future was possible for both humans and Illyrians alike. As the Vengeance drifted in the void, the Phantom docking with its wounded hull to take on the boarding party, Pollux's voice fell silent. His students sat in rapt attention, their eyes wide and their hearts pounding. They had just witnessed a pivotal moment in history, a turning point in the long and bloody conflict between Earth and the Illyrian Empire. A moment where the fate of two worlds had hung in the balance, decided by the actions of a few brave souls. And though they knew that the story was far from over, that there would be many more challenges and trials to come, they couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Pride in the resilience and courage of their species, in the indomitable human spirit that had refused to bend or break, even in the face of annihilation. The classroom was silent, the weight of the tale hanging in the air. And then, from the back of the room, a single voice spoke up. "What happened next, Professor?" the student asked, her voice hushed with anticipation. "After they captured Krell, after the Illyrian fleet stood down, what happened then?" Pollux smiled, a glimmer in his ancient eyes. "Ah," he said softly, "that, my dear, is a story for another time. For the true history of the Illyrian War, and the fragile peace that followed, is a tale even vaster and more complex than the one I have told you today." He leaned forward, his gaze sweeping over the classroom. "But know this, the events you have heard today, the sacrifices and triumphs of Admiral Grant and his crew, they were just the beginning, the first steps on a long and winding road, a road that would test the limits of human endurance and ingenuity, and ultimately reshape the very fabric of our galaxy." The old historian straightened, his voice ringing with the weight of ages. "And that, my students, is the true legacy of the Illyrian War. Not just the battles fought and the lives lost, but the lessons learned, the bonds forged in the crucible of conflict. The recognition that for all our differences, humans and Illyrians are more alike than we ever dared to imagine." Pollux's eyes shone with a distant light, as if seeing something far beyond the confines of the classroom. The road ahead would be long and hard, paved with setbacks and sacrifices, but in the end, it would lead us to a new era, a time of unprecedented cooperation and discovery between our two species. He smiled, a smile tinged with both joy and sorrow. "But that, as I said, is a story for another day. For now, let us reflect on the tale of Admiral Grant and his valiant crew, and the price they paid for the peace we now enjoy. Let us remember their courage, their resolve, and their unwavering belief in the potential of our species." As the students filed out of the classroom, their minds buzzing with the weight of history, Pollux watched them go, a sense of pride and purpose swelling in his chest. They were the future, these bright young minds, the inheritors of the legacy he had spent his life preserving. And as long as that legacy endured, as long as the tales of heroes like Vincent Grant continued to inspire and uplift, Pollux knew that the sacrifices of the past would never be forgotten, that the light of human courage and compassion would continue to shine, a beacon of hope in a vast and often dark universe. The old historian turned to the window, gazing out at the stars that glittered in the endless black, the stars that had once been the domain of the Illyrian Empire, a realm of conquest and subjugation. But now, thanks to the efforts of a few brave souls, those stars held the promise of a new future, a future of peace, of understanding, of endless possibility. And as Pollux let his mind wander among those stars, he knew that his work was not yet done, that there were still so many stories to tell, so many lessons to impart. But for now, he was content, secure in the knowledge that the legacy of the Illyrian War and the heroes who had fought it was in good hands. With a final wistful smile, the old historian turned from the window and began to prepare for his next class. The story of humanity and the Illyrians was far from over, he knew, but with each new generation, each new telling of the tale, it grew richer and more profound. And that, in the end, was the true power of history. Not just to record the events of the past, but to shape the course of the future, to light the way for those who would come after, and to ensure that the sacrifices of the brave are never forgotten. As Pollux gathered his notes and straightened his robes, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to his calling. The story of the Illyrian War had been told, but there were so many more waiting in the wings. And he would be there to tell them, to pass on the wisdom and the courage of the past to the leaders of tomorrow. For as long as there were stories to be told, and ears to hear them, Pollux knew that his work would never be done. With a final nod to the empty classroom, the old historian stepped out into the hall, ready to face the challenges and the triumphs of a new day. The legacy of the Illyrian War and the heroes who had fought it would endure, and with it, the hope for a brighter future, for humans and Illyrians alike. Though, as the fragile peace between humans and Illyrians took root, Pollux's voice grew heavy with the weight of what was to come. But even as our two species began to rebuild, to forge a new path together, a shadow was growing in the depths of space, a shadow that threatened to engulf us all. Across the galaxy, ships burned and outposts crumbled, a series of brutal attacks, each one carefully calculated to sow discord and fear. The Crimson Syndicate, a name whispered in dark corners and seedy taverns, had made their move. Admiral Grant slammed his fist on the table as reports flooded in. Human and Illyrian casualties, mounting by the day. The peace they had fought so hard for, teetering on the brink. Beside him, Admiral Jan's face was grim. They call him the Phantom, a ghost striking from the shadows. But ghosts leave trails, and we will find him. Together they assembled a team. The best of the best, human and Illyrian alike. Captain Reeves, Dr. Kerrick, Commander Arya Voss, each one a master of their craft, united in their determination to bring the Phantom to justice. But as they dug deeper, the truth began to unravel. Corruption, seeping into the highest levels of power. Traitors in their midst, wearing friendly faces. And at the center of it all, a familiar name. General Zirin, Krell's right hand, risen from the grave to plague them once more. Dr. Kerrick paled as he read the decoded transmission. The NSB, Zirin's after the Singularity Bomb. With that kind of power... Grant's jaw tightened. He'd be unstoppable. We have to find him now. The trail led them to the edge of known space, to a nameless world shrouded in eternal night. Zirin's fortress rose from the darkness, a monstrosity of black metal and pulsing energy fields. The assault was brutal, desperate. Crimson Syndicate troops swarmed like angry hornets, laser fire stitching the air. Grant and his team carved a path through the chaos, the stench of ozone and charred flesh thick in their nostrils. In the heart of the fortress they found him. General Zirin, eyes alight with madness, the NSB glowing in his grasp. And the battle was joined, a whirlwind of fists and fury. Grant and Zirin clashed like titans, trading blows that would shatter bone. Around them the team fought to reach the bomb, to pry it from the Phantom's grasp. But Zirin was strong, fueled by hate and twisted ambition. It was Jan who turned the tide, throwing himself into the fray with a roar. A moment of distraction, a chance for Grant to strike. And the Phantom fell, the NSB clattering from his lifeless fingers. But the victory was bitter, bought with blood. Jan lay unmoving, his life given for their cause, and though the Crimson Syndicate was broken, their leader slain, the scars would linger long. Pollux's voice was heavy with grief as he recounted the toll of that final battle. The lives lost, the sacrifices made, but there was pride too, and a glimmer of hope. In that moment, we saw the true strength of the bond between our peoples, forged in the crucible of war, tempered by shared loss and triumph. It would not be easy, the path ahead, but together we would walk it, humans and Illyrians, side by side, into a future brighter than either had dared to dream. The historian paused, his eyes distant. The story of the Illyrian War was drawing to a close, but the story of what came after was only beginning. A story of rebuilding, of healing, of two species learning to trust and rely on one another. In the grand halls of the newly constructed Unity Citadel, human and Illyrian dignitaries gathered to witness a moment that would be etched in the annals of galactic history. The Jan Accords, named in honor of the fallen Illyrian hero, lay upon a gleaming table, awaiting the signatures that would seal the peace between two once warring civilizations. Admiral Grant and Dr. Kerrick, now hailed as the architects of this unprecedented alliance, stepped forward to affix their names to the document. As they did so, a hush fell over the assembled crowd, the weight of the moment palpable in the air. The Jan Accords included sweeping provisions for shared research and development initiatives, joint military training exercises, and even cultural exchange programs aimed at fostering deeper understanding between humans and Illyrians. It was an audacious vision of a future in which the two species would stand together as allies and partners, united in their exploration of the cosmos. In the weeks and months that followed, Grant and Kerrick threw themselves into their new roles as co-leaders of the Interstellar Cooperation Initiative, ICI, the organization tasked with overseeing the implementation of the Jan Accords. They worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps between human and Illyrian society, mediating disputes, coordinating joint projects, and serving as living symbols of the new era of peace. But even as the ICI made remarkable strides in bringing the two species together, whispers of discontent began to surface. On Earth, some human factions openly questioned the wisdom of sharing advanced technology with a former enemy, warning of the potential for another Illyrian betrayal. And among the Illyrians, a growing number of hardliners chafed at what they saw as a surrender of their sovereignty and a capitulation to human demands. As the years wore on and the scars of the war began to fade, these tensions only grew. Demagogues on both sides stoked the flames of xenophobia and nationalism, calling for a return to the old ways of mistrust and hostility. Even within the ICI itself, Grant and Kerrick found themselves increasingly at odds, their once unshakable partnership strained by the competing demands of their respective peoples. The narrator pauses, a note of sorrow entering his voice. Looking back, I think we should have seen the warning signs. The way Kerrick withdrew into his work, the long hours he spent locked away in his private lab, the increasing frequency of his trips back to Illyrian space, always under the guise of diplomatic missions. But we were all so desperate to believe in the dream of peace, to think that we had finally put the horrors of war behind us. We didn't want to see what was right in front of our eyes. He shakes his head, his gaze distant. It was Grant who finally realized the truth. He had grown suspicious of Kerrick's behavior and dispatched a trusted aide to investigate. What they uncovered was beyond our worst nightmares. In a secret facility deep within Illyrian territory, Dr. Kerrick had been working to create a new and terrifying weapon. Taking the technology behind the NSB to new heights, he had developed a device capable of annihilating not just a single world, but entire star systems. And at the heart of this monstrous creation lay a twisted ideology, one that saw the Illyrians as the rightful rulers of the galaxy and the humans as little more than obstacles to be swept aside. When Grant confronted him, Kerrick didn't even try to deny it, the narrator continues, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. He ranted about the superiority of the Illyrian race, about how the Jeanne Accords were nothing more than a tool to lull humanity into complacency. He truly believed that he was doing the right thing, that he was saving his species from the threat of human aggression. In the end, Grant had no choice. With a heavy heart, he rallied the forces of the ICI and launched a desperate mission to stop Kerrick before it was too late. The battle was fought on the Illyrian homeworld itself, in the very heart of the rogue scientist's power. The narrator's voice grows thick with emotion as he recounts the final moments of that fateful confrontation. Kerrick had installed the weapon in the planet's core, rigging it to detonate if anyone tried to tamper with it. Grant knew that the only way to stop it was to set off the device prematurely, before it could build up to full power. But doing so would mean sacrificing himself and condemning the Illyrian homeworld to destruction. In a voice choked with tears, the narrator describes the final exchange between the two former friends. Grant pleaded with Kerrick to see reason, to understand that peace was the only way forward. But Kerrick was too far gone, consumed by his own hatred and fear. In the end, Grant had no choice. With a final anguished apology, he activated the detonator, and the world around them erupted in a blaze of searing light. The loss of their homeworld was a devastating blow to the Illyrian people. Millions perished in the cataclysm, and countless more were left homeless and adrift. The once proud warrior race was reduced to a scattered diaspora, struggling to come to terms with the betrayal of one of their own and the destruction of all they held dear. For the humans, the price of victory was a bitter one. They had lost a great hero in Admiral Grant, and the knowledge that they had been forced to destroy an entire world in the name of peace weighed heavily upon them. Many began to question whether true coexistence with the Illyrians was even possible, or if the differences between their species were simply too great to overcome. As the narrator draws his tale to a close, he reflects on the lessons of the Earth-Illyrian War and its aftermath. In the end, perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was not the lives lost or the worlds destroyed, but the realization that even the noblest of intentions can be twisted by fear and prejudice, that the road to peace is often paved with the blood of the innocent and that the price of victory can sometimes be higher than we ever imagined. He looks out at his audience, his eyes filled with a deep and abiding sorrow. The Earth-Illyrian War may be over, but its legacy endures. And as we look to the future, we must ask ourselves, have we truly learned from the mistakes of the past, or are we doomed to repeat them in an endless cycle of conflict and misunderstanding? With those words, the narrator falls silent, leaving his listeners to grapple with the profound questions he has raised. And in the stillness that follows, each one is left to ponder the weight of the choices that lie ahead, and the toll they may yet take on the fragile peace between two worlds. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.